So welcome. I can see that there are a number of persons in the audience who perhaps have visited this institute for the first time, and they need some introduction, particularly of the lecture series, Dr. P V Bapat Memorial Lecture, as also an introduction to the speaker. I request Professor Bahulkar to kindly introduce the lecture series as well as the speaker of the occasion.
Friends, it gives me immense pleasure to be with you this evening for the 18th memorial lecture in the loving memory of Professor P V Bapat, who was known as a great authority on Buddhism. We have invited Dr. Ashwini Mokashi to deliver a lecture on Sapiens and Sthitaprajna, a comparative study in Seneca and the Bhagavad Gita. I would like to say a few words about Professor P V Bapat, who had been my indirect guru. He was the guru of my gurus, and he was one of the great scholars who extensively worked mainly in the field of Pali literature and also Chinese Buddhism. Professor P V Bapat was one of the 5 or 6 eminent disciples of Dr. Dharmananda Kosambi, who is regarded to be a pioneer of Buddhist studies in India, particularly in Maharashtra, and who was instrumental in introducing for the first time the study of Pali language and literature in the Ferguson College in 1912. Professor Bapat had many honors, and one of the prestigious positions which he had was that he was invited to edit a very prestigious volume called 2500 Years of Buddhism, published by Government of India in 1956 on the occasion of 2500 years of the Mahaparinirvana of the Buddha. It's a very good volume contributed by various eminent scholars in India abroad. Besides that, Professor Bapat continued to teach Pali, do extensive research in Theravada literature, also Mahayana. He knew Chinese very well, and he edited and translated some works which were available only in their Chinese translations. As a beginner of Buddhist studies, I would say that one should admire Professor Bapat for his continuous research, his great industry, studying Chinese. It's not easy to understand that classical Chinese, which is the translation of Indian works, Indian Buddhist works. A number of times people had an idea, people had a notion that all those works translated into Chinese were translated from Sanskrit mainly or Pali. But the recent research reveals that there was a dialect called Gandhari dialect existed in Gandhar or Kandahar in Afghanistan, which was a seat of Buddhist learning. You know Bamiyan, the Buddha. And the texts written in Gandhari were migrated to China and were translated into Chinese, which were recovered by Professor Bapat and others and made available to us in their modern translations. Professor Bapat was closely associated with this institute for several decades, and he continued to work until the last breath. Today's speaker, Dr. Ashwini Mokashi, is not new to Pune. She is from Pune, but now living in New Jersey, connected with Princeton University. She is a former president of the Princeton Research Forum and member of the executive board of Princeton University.
No, just Princeton Research Forum.
Pardon?
I'm only a member of Princeton Research Forum.
Research Forum,
Yeah.
yeah. And she has done MA in philosophy from Pune University and also PhD from the same university. And today's lecture is something like a summary of her research under the same title, Sapiens and Sthitaprajna, her PhD thesis done under the able guidance of Professor S.R. Talgatti, who is known as a great scholar of Indian philosophy. Unfortunately, he cannot attend today's lecture because of some personal reasons. Dr. Mokashi has also learned Greek, and that's why she could work extensively in Greek philosophy and Indian philosophy and has consulted the works in Greek. Several years ago, she has also conducted a course in Greek, I think in the Department of Sanskrit, and I know some students, the then students, who still remember her wonderful teaching. Without taking much of your time, I request Dr. Mokashi to begin her lecture. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to this lecture. I'm very delighted, honored, and humbled by this invitation to deliver a talk at the Bhandarkar Institute, and I'm deeply grateful to Professor Bahulkar for this opportunity. There's no institute to compare with the Bhandarkar in the field of Indology. To my mind, this place has a lot in common with the Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton, with its beautiful campus, its focus on research and welcoming visitors. I'm confident that the Institute will continue to grow and preserve Indological studies in the academic world. I should also clarify that my association is mostly with the Princeton Research Forum, and it's a group of independent research scholars, which is slightly different from the university. So I frequently go to the Princeton University and work with the scholars there, but these two are different organizations. I would like to pay my respects to Professor P V Bapat, in whose memory the talk is held. As Professor Bahulkar said, he was well known for his book, 2500 Years of Buddhism, for which philosopher and President Radhakrishnan had written a foreword. It's quite amazing how many wonderful scholars this great city of Pune has produced over the years. So I'm extremely fortunate to be here talking with all of you. This talk is based on my upcoming book, which is about to be published in a couple of weeks. And I would like to present a copy of this book to the Bhandarkar Institute and to Professor Bahulkar in gratitude for this opportunity. So let me begin my talk by introducing the topic of today's talk. The idea of my book, Sapiens and Sthitaprajna, occurred to me in the fall of 1992 when I was a student in London. And I envisioned comparing the Stoics with the Gita, given what I saw as their apparent similarities in thinking, their ways of addressing the social and societal challenges, and their goals of raising a morally sound community despite all the wars and chaos surrounding them. I worked on these ideas for many years, finally concluding my thesis in 2002. And after a decade or more, I realized that the academic work of the comparison between the Stoics and the Gita is not just for the scholars of philosophy, but it has major implications and applicability for all of us. One can evaluate the current challenges in our global community in a cohesive way using these lenses. So I returned to my work with a revised focus and hence decided to revise the work from a different angle and bring it in front of all of you. So some central problems in all the ancient and modern cultures are how to behave, what is virtue, what is wisdom, how to inculcate it in society, how to maintain discipline, how to encourage people to become good and lead a harmonious life, how to achieve happiness and well-being. The ancient philosophies try to address some of these issues by asking people to turn into ideal human beings who then will create a good society. The themes in the ancient texts continue to dominate the conversation even today, while the quest for happiness is pursued anew with each new generation. Nevertheless, the ancient wisdom has stood the test of time, and it behooves us to apply these principles to modern situations. The philosophical understanding of emotions is the kind of topic that I'm going to take up in detail a bit later, so I'll pass on that right now. And moving forward, I should say that my book starts a dialogue on these questions that have been occupying the attention of ancient philosophers and modern philosophers through the works of Seneca and the Bhagavad Gita. So their dialogue addresses their methods, their tools, and discusses their solutions in attaining the goal of individual happiness, as well as societal well-being. Whether they are successful compared to each other is not the major point of concern as far as I'm concerned. The concern is how do they succeed in their own spheres and whether together we can make use of some of their ideas to create solutions for a global world in taking into account happiness, peace, and well-being through virtue and wisdom pathways. So now let us talk about the book. So the book, as I said, is called Sapiens and Sthitaprajna. It's a comparative work in ancient Western and Indian philosophy. It's a comparison of the concept of the wise person known as Sapiens in Seneca and as Sthitaprajna in the Bhagavad Gita. The word sapiens, as in Homo sapiens, means a human being. The Latin word sapiens, used by itself, means a wise person. Both texts, which is like Seneca's works and the Bhagavad Gita, were written sometimes around the 1st century BC, but as the scholars of the Gita know that there are a lot of controversies about when the Gita was written. But roughly we could say it was in that period of time. The Gita was written in Sanskrit and Seneca wrote in Latin. Yet some of the key terms are borrowed from Greek language. Both writings have had a tremendous impact on philosophical and religious literatures of many languages. The genesis of the concept of the wise person dates to the Greek philosophy of Socrates and Plato in the Western tradition and to the Upanishads in the Indian tradition. The writings of Seneca and the Bhagavad Gita display many similar philosophical insights. So the Sapiens and the Sthitaprajna clearly display a family resemblance in their internal structure as well as their outward manifestation. Now let us talk a little bit about Stoicism and Seneca. Most of us know the word Stoic to mean impassive or indifferent, and we associate that understanding with the Stoic school as well. and that is incorrect. The Stoics considered pursuit of happiness important and believed that the concept of happiness was correlated with acting virtuously. The history of Stoicism ranges over 5 centuries, from 300 BC to 180 AD. The school flourished in 3 periods: early Stoa, middle Stoa, and late Stoa, which is also known as the Imperial or Roman Stoa. Zeno was the founder of the school, and other than Zeno, some other prominent Stoics were Chrysippus, Cicero, Venetius, Posidonius, besides the Roman Stoics, Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. Seneca's full name was Lucius Annius Seneca. He was born between 4th and 1st BC in southern Spain in Cordoba, and died around 65 AD on an island near Italy called Corsica. He was the son of Seneca the Elder, who was a rhetorician. Seneca himself was a very prominent figure in the reigns of Claudius and Nero. He was a tutor to the evil King Nero and also an advisor to him, and he enjoyed the second highest position in his kingdom, including enjoying great wealth and power. But as it happens, whenever you're working for an evil king, the end is always very tragic, which is what happened to Seneca as well, as he was ordered to commit suicide towards the end of his life. Now, the idea of sapiens is, in a symbolic way, Socrates was the uncrowned philosopher king. He was the father of philosophy, he was a lover of wisdom, and he was a great role model for sapiens. The ideal of sapiens means the person is expert in technical knowledge, which is called techne. He's completely rational, he's virtuous, he's expert in dialectics, he's someone who reflects upon a choice of action and chooses the right course of action, and who has a kingly authority to be answerable to no one. In short, he or she is a leader of society. Comprehending the sapiens is as an embodiment of Stoic ethics entails understanding Stoic ethical notions. Some of the common features of the Stoic ethics include the concepts of kathekonta, which is appropriate actions, oikoiosis, or you could say what belongs to oneself, arete, which is normally translated as virtue, but the philological understanding of arete is also excellence, detachment or apatheia, telos or goal of life, eudaimonia or happy life, and the sapiens in whom all the ethical terms find their apotheosis. Stoic dialectics plays a key role in understanding how the wise person acquires the expertise to match different situations with suitable arguments, to resist the impulse and impulsive responses called hormai, and give their assent or katasynthesis to the right judgment. So giving an assent means giving permission to yourself to do something. And there are 2 kinds of assents. One is a weak assent, which is like raising your eyebrows if you see something that surprises you. Or a strong assent, which is if you're angry and you allow yourself to yell at somebody, then that's considered giving an assent to yelling. For instance, if a sapien sees a bull charging in his direction, he will assent to run, but not out of panic, but to preserve his or her life. The Stoic theory of indifference includes preferred indifference and dispreferred indifference, and it sheds some light on the inherent sense of detachment, again, apatheia, in the sapiens. For example, health, wealth, beauty, and pleasure are preferred indifference. They're nice to have, yet they are neither beneficial nor harmful. Whereas poverty, pain, and disease are dispreferred indifference, we don't really want them. This perspective helps one to be detached by not identifying oneself with one's possessions or one's attributes, and enables a person to seek virtue. Stoics were accused of elitism since they proposed a human ideal which only a few people can aspire to. Seneca's great contribution is to make this concept open to everyone by understanding their emotions and giving them directions, instead of merely asking people to rise to a high standard of ethical standards of Stoicism. So now let's turn to the concept of Sthitaprajna in the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm sure there are many people in the audience who understand the Gita far better than I do. But here's a brief sketch of what the concept of the Sthitaprajna is all about. The Bhagavad Gita presents the concept of the Sthitaprajna mainly in the 19 verses of the second Adhyaya. Arjun asks Krishna, Sthitaprajna sa ka bhasha? Krishna responds to that question, and we summarize that the Sthitaprajna is a believer in the teachings of the Gita. Ye yatha mam prapadyante tas tathaiva bhajamyaham. He or she excels in swadharma, yoga karma su kaushalam. He or she has equanimity or samatvam. Samatvam yoga uchyate, as in 2.48 in the Gita, and is equidistant from pleasure and pain. Samadukha sukhi kritva labha labha jayajayo. He or she develops non-attachment or anasakti. Na bhinandati na dveshti tasya prajna pratishtita. And lastly, he or she attains tranquility of mind or shanti. Nirmamo nirahankara sashantim adhigachati. The Sthitaprajna is endowed with wisdom, virtue, and is blessed with permanent happiness. The process of becoming a sage is explained in terms of the analogy of the chariot mentioned in the Katha Upanishad. A chariot travels on the path of the senses. It ignores the material desires of the senses, and it helps them turn inwards and guides them on the path of meditation. The intellect is a charioteer. The buddhi is a charioteer. It controls the mind. It curbs its tendencies and takes the chariot to its destination of moksha or paramananda. Likewise, the Sthitaprajna uses buddhi as a guide to reach the goal of moksha. Thus, the sage becomes a jnana yogi. By doing right actions, the Sthitaprajna also becomes a karma yogi. So, to summarize, a Sthitaprajna has abundant all desires, is without any ego, ahankara. The concern for the self is absorbed into a concern for the divine. He or she has secured the greatest reward of peace and happiness. The state is known as a state of stabilized wisdom, Sthita Prajna, or the state of Brahman establishment, Brahmisthiti. The state is very difficult to attain, stays with the Sthita Prajna until the end, and at the end of life, he or she attains nirvana. Esha Brahmisthiti Partha Nainam Prapya Vimuhyati Sthitva Samantakaalepi Brahma Nirvanam Ruchati. Now, having seen what the concept of Sthitaprajna is, we can turn to talk about the comparison between Sapiens and the Sthitaprajna. So we can see that in either system, a wise person is endowed with both virtue and wisdom. Wisdom consists of making right judgments. Wisdom anticipates the capacity for dialectics, for explaining and defending one's action. Right action and right thinking together lead to integrity of thoughts and action. Virtue consists in following the wise choices. A virtuous person is virtuous all the time, whether their action is conventional or not. A person who makes an erroneous judgment at any time is ignoramus. A wise person never errs. Happiness consists in knowing that one has done the right thing at the right time. Whatever a wise person chooses to do is for the good of the mankind. In that sense, he or she is divine. A virtuous wise person always enjoys peace and happiness, and here always is underlined. So in a more detailed examination, it emerged that both systems share the idea of virtue and demand the wisdom and intellectual rigor necessary to practice virtue and perform right actions. Both wise persons have a choice of action, provided they make a good judgment and justify their decision. There is some circularity involved in this reasoning, as a wise person is defined as the one who always chooses to do the right action, and the right action is defined as the one which is performed by the wise person. Both systems deny any place for erroneous judgment. Those making incorrect judgments are ignorant, they are not wise. Both sages are required to be detached from their circumstances and from passions to enable themselves to make an objective decision as to what the right action is. They are equanimous to either pleasure or pain. They do not choose an action based on teleological merit or pleasure or trying to follow their desires. Thus, the Gita allows Arjuna to kill his enemies in war, even though they are his relatives. And Seneca allows Sapiens to avenge the murder of his father, but not out of anger, but because that's the right thing to do. Arjuna is advised, both Seneca and the Gita denounce the emotion of anger and believe it causes one's own destruction. I mean, just to give an idea, what Seneca is saying here, Seneca was asked once, like, what do you do? Or what does a wise man do if he sees his father getting murdered? Wouldn't he be enraged and not in a good state? So Seneca says that a wise man does respond, but he doesn't necessarily react. And anger only eats oneself from inside. So he takes action to avenge the murder of his father, but he doesn't necessarily get angry because anger has no, it has no meaning, it's senseless. Moving on, both the systems agree on happiness as a reward. All the Hellenic schools aimed at happiness as the summum bonum, yet they all produce different definitions of the nature of happiness. For Democritus, it was a break from disturbing emotions. For the Epicureans, it was an indulgence in hedonistic activities. For Stoic Zeno, it was a smooth flow of life. And for Seneca, it was peacefulness and constant tranquility. The Gita and the Upanishads also aimed at happiness, which they considered to be the outcome of the experience of moksha. As the concept of moksha is divine or mystic, so is the happiness ensuing from it. The Gita prefers to call it bliss. Indian scholars believe that the divine bliss is a very precious experience to be enjoyed by the sages, as the sage becomes one with the Brahman and enjoys the blissful nature of the Brahman. So finally, we surveyed the major differences between Seneca and the Gita with regards to their concept of sages. So the first one is the metaphysical difference. The first category is the metaphysical difference. And there's a touch of divine in the Gita. So it seems in a way that the line of departure for both the cultures might have been the same. However, they ultimately end on a different plane. The Gita goes to a metaphysical plane, whereas Stoics prefer to stop at the ethical plateau. The reason it stands out as a significant difference is twofold: the status of the Gita as one of the Prasthanatrayi, and the goal of the Sthitaprajna as moksha. In the 11th Adhyaya of the Gita, the text very explicitly discusses the nature of divine experience, such as the experience of Vishwarupa Darshan, in which Krishna shows Arjuna that the world resides in him and that he is the creator of the universe. The second Adhyaya deals with theory of action and how to achieve the goal of life by continuing to do one's duties, whereas the 15th chapter introduces one to the divine ways of moksha and leads one to the mysticism of the Gita. The Gita's metaphysics and its concepts such as moksha, transcendental happiness, or divine bliss have no parallel in Stoicism. The Sthitaprajna becomes a virtuous person, achieves moksha, and stops the life cycle of birth and rebirth by becoming a part of the divine Brahman. The sapiens becomes virtuous in preparation for death, which is the endpoint of the journey of life. Stoicism aims at the morality of the wise person. It does not concern itself with the metaphysical aspect of his being. In the same manner as the Gita, Seneca believes that the goal for good Roman is to become virtuous before the end of life and be prepared for death. As Stoicism does not give any metaphysical or religious coloring to the concept of the sapiens, the concept is seen as the epitome of ethical practices, not metaphysical. The second category of difference is conceptual differences. There are conceptual differences between the ways the two sages have been described in the two systems. Even though the definition of a Sthitaprajna is one with steady wisdom, and it would be applicable to the sapiens as well, the terms yogastha, or established in yoga, or samadhistha, wrapped in meditation, would not be applicable to the sapiens. The process of becoming wise in the two systems calls for different skills. In terms of the Gita, it calls for meditation, as well as contemplation, as they say, like chintan, manan, sadhan. And in terms of Seneca, it's only contemplation, and that Seneca would say suffices for completing the journey as a wise person. The third category is ethical differences. There are certain ethical concepts in Stoicism which have no parallels in the Gita. For example, the notion of katikonta, or appropriate action. And appropriate action is different from right action. So appropriate action is on the way to the right action, but the right action is something which you cannot fault with. Oikaisis, or familiarization of what belongs to oneself. For example, we are all aware of our personal belongings, personal space, and if anybody invades into that space, we do not like that. And Stoics believe that it also helps you understand the concept of justice by understanding what belongs to you, what is yours, and so you can give respect to the others by understanding what is theirs. Living in accordance with nature. So similarly, certain ethical concepts in the Gita do not find any counterparts in Stoicism, such as the notion of dharma or swadharma and the concept of morality explained in the light of moksha. There is no precise parallel of the concept of dharma in the Stoic philosophy. Seneca does not formulate the notion of one's duty in the same detailed fashion as that of the Manusmriti, for example. Seneca also does not regulate how one should spend one's life in every detail, including getting married, begetting children, etc. We find references suggesting that these expectations existed in society, but they were not mandatory. Seneca expects the sapiens to be a guide to society, a model of virtuous behavior, and a leader of morality and right action. His theory of right action is justified by the notion of duty. I want to move on to Seneca's treatment of various emotions, partly because this is something that seriously attracted me to Seneca's philosophy, and partly because I think it's just so different from any other Stoics or other philosophies in the West or the East, including the Gita. Seneca's treatment of various emotions is one of the most unique features of his philosophical writings. It is unparalleled either in other Stoic writings or in the Gita. Seneca treats different emotions with the skill of a psychological therapist and shows the futility of those emotions in a very logical and sensitive way, without making it sound like a Stoic mandate of denying passions to any human being. He proposes emotional therapy for novices to give them guidance with how to control one's emotions to become a sage. His position differs from the orthodox Stoic belief in eradication of emotions. Instead, he suggests various ways to avoid the impact of negative emotions in one's lives. For example, he recommends that people prone to anger should take more rest and not tire themselves out physically to reduce the chances of getting angry. He recommends avoiding the object of anger and keeping it out of sight to enable one to keep it out of one's mind. He recommends controlling the feeling of self-pity and grief by moving on with one's life and doing one's actions to get a grip on one's grief. In short, Seneca recommends a lot of strategies to get around the negative emotions and to preserve one's emotional equilibrium. Seneca does not offer any global techniques such as meditation or breathing techniques to relieve one of physical agony. However, he does suggest contemplation and introspection as ways to focus on the improvement of one's thoughts and actions. Seneca uses the theory of indifference to show that even most conventional things can be treated as indifference, and he also suggests using the assent to give oneself permission to assent to appropriate emotion and in a moderate form. Seneca, as many other Greek or Roman philosophers, understands emotions as cognitive. Hence, emotions are also supposed to be judgments that help one decide right from wrong. Control of emotions enables one to make use of them as cognitive judgments. Just as Seneca insists on eradicating the notorious emotions like anger and grief, he also teaches us the control of emotions and makes them very useful in the process of decision making. Hence, I believe Seneca deserves a lot of credit for his contributions to the ancient understanding of psychology and to the notions of psychotherapy by treating emotions on par with thoughts and curing them wisely. The argument of the book rests here, and thank you for patient hearing, and I would be happy to take questions.
You have from time to time mentioned he or she, but I believe in Gita it is always a he, and I think it will be also he in Plato and Aristotle everywhere. So what made you think of he or she?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, I spent some time in my book in the introduction explaining that. So currently the academic style is that even when you're talking about the ancient texts, you always refer to people as he or she. And especially since they believe that there's been so much injustice done to women by being ignored in the ancient texts, they sometimes go to the other extreme and they never use he and they just use she. And I wanted to be cognizant of both my Indian readers and Western readers, so I decided to make it he or she.
I may also observe that
Yeah.
if you read Bible today,
Yeah.
the brothers and sisters, and it was always brothers before.
Yes.
We have just added the sisters.
Yeah. That's the demand of the time.
In legal texts or legal books actually,
Mm-hmm.
it's always he, and there he means he and she. So,
Yeah, you're right about that because again, I can't read into Seneca's mind, but I believe the advice that he has given is applicable to both men and women. And sometimes he does say particularly women, like especially when he talks about the notion of grief. And he has two books which are called Consolations to Marcia and Consolations to Helvia. And he feels that the emotion of grief is much stronger in women than it is in men. And so he addresses those books, especially to women. But in all other cases, I believe women are equally capable of anger as are men.
Can you elaborate something about social background in both the...
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it's again part of my book. And social background in terms of the Sapiens, right? Right, so I think we are talking about basically 1st century BC, 1st century AD period. And I think in both cases, the Sapiens or Sthitaprajna were supposed to be the leaders of society. And, to give examples like Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, was considered a wise man, so was Socrates. And if you ask Seneca, he would say that I'm on the way to become wise, but I'm not a wise man myself. So they always agreed. There was some kind of some kind of an understanding that unless and until the person is dead, you don't call them a wise person, because they are constantly evolving into a virtuous person. But having said that, we see that these people were the leaders of society. They had a lot of respect. They had positions of power. They were either judges or orators or serving the king or kings themselves. I don't know in how many cases the kings would be considered wise people. I mean, the notion of philosopher king existed mostly in theory. I don't think they were actually, sort of kings. So let's say, apart from the kings, there were still a lot of people who were philosophers and others who were trying to be virtuous. Likewise, in the Indian society as well. I mean, for the Gita, Krishna is the Sthitaprajna, but of course, Krishna is much more than the Sthitaprajna. And then there are other people, like wise people or sadhus, who are also considered Sthitaprajnas. And the sages were very, very highly respected. Like, for example, if you're familiar with Kalidasa's Abhidhyana Shakuntalam, then the King Dushyant goes to King Kanva and he sees that, no matter that I am the king, you are to be respected because you are a sage. So I think these ideals were very seriously followed, and they were very seriously sort of, understood. And in some ways, I think it was also an attempt to create communities and to build communities. In the sense, right now we have law and order system for disciplining individuals who are misbehaving. In those days, there was not so much discipline, but this solved the problems of misbehavior in different ways. Like, they tried to sort of create this ideal of a human being, and they asked everybody to aspire to it. So the whole society was at a different sort of level, than what it could be otherwise. And so the idea was to sort of build the communities in a way that they continue to be wise, virtuous, well-behaved, so that there are not so many law and order issues. Anyway, that's just my sarcastic explanation of why this particular system was seen in both the traditions.
In today's life, we try to follow Gita.
Mm-hmm.
We try to behave what is mentioned in the Gita. Does this happen in Romans also today? They try to behave or try to live what is mentioned in Stoics?
Okay, so that's a great question. So first of all, Roman society those days, doesn't quite exist as Roman society today, in the sense like the Roman civilization kind of came to an end in some ways, and it was all around the parts of Italy and other places. But let's just say that Roman civilization has transferred into the Western society today. So there's definitely a big outcry of Stoicism and the need for following values, the need for solving problems and in ways that are that are sort of like more positive, to put it mildly. What I see today is that there's just a sort of outbreak of problems like anxiety and depression, and sometimes leading to suicides among all ages in the Western society. And they're trying to go away from all these notions. And of course, when there are mental and emotional disorders, then people have to go to psychiatrists and psychotherapists and try to get cured if they could. But in the olden days, even a mere 100 years ago, we always referred to the philosophical wisdom. The modern psychology, analytical psychology, came into being very recently. So what did people do before that? I mean, the problems existed even then. They existed in the ancient times. They still exist. So in the earlier times, people used to refer to the philosophical wisdom. Now we've kind of forgotten that. But I still believe that philosophy may not help somebody who is, absolutely in a bad way, but philosophy can stop all these problems from happening. And if we try to follow this, we can improve this sort of mental health of the society. I could be totally, optimistic in a way that's not feasible, but there's no harm in trying this experiment, I believe. As far as the Stoicism, as I said, there is a sort of big revival of Stoicism in the Western world, and I'm very glad to see that. Like when I started the work on Stoicism, there were very few people who were writing about it, and I mean, in the world of scholarship, if you're not working on Plato, then you're not working on philosophy. So I suffer from the bias in the earlier stages. But now I see a lot of people are very interested in finding out what the Stoics have to say and how they're solving the problems and how they could be useful in today's world.
Can you differentiate between Pandit and Jnani?
Sorry, who's speaking?
I'm speaking.
Oh, yeah.
My question is, can you differentiate between Pandit, which is a wise man, and a Jnani? A Jnani is a person knowledgeable who evolves from inside, like Dhaneshwar, Tukaram or Ramdas are Jnani.
Yeah, I think...
Pandit is a professor.
Yeah,
so
that's
is there
right.
anything in your book because there is no difference as I could hear from your lecture between the Pandit and the Jnani.
Okay, I haven't really used the word Pandit in my book at all. But what I see is that, there are two ways suggested by the Gita. One is Karma Marga and one is Jnana Marga. And the Sthitaprajna is both a Karma Yogi and Jnana Yogi. Whether a Sthitaprajna is a Pandit or not is slightly irrelevant because you can be a Pandit and you can be a Jnani, or you can be a Jnani and not be a Pandit. But you're right in saying that a Pandit is a scholar and Jnani is somebody who is a self-realized soul. Does that answer your question?
I have only one observation to make. Just as emotions as cognitive judgments is being talked about in Senecas, I think in Patanjali Yoga Darshan, there are specific mentions of when the wrong kind of emotions disturb you, how do you replace those thoughts by other kind of good thoughts in order to overcome these disturbances. So that will go together with what Seneca is saying, most probably. I wouldn't know.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I haven't read Seneca.
Well, thank you for telling me that. Yeah, I'll look into it. Yes.
One of the prescriptions of Seneca is contemplation.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Contemplation
Uh-huh.
is prescribed by Seneca
Yeah.
as something that a wise man does. In case of Indian philosophy, you specifically know about meditation and what you meditate on. But what exactly does contemplation refer to?
Contemplation.
What do you think
Contemplation
about
in Seneca.
Contemplation in case of Seneca.
Okay, so he has actually a lot of passages where he talks about contemplation, and basically what he suggests is that, like, let's say if you are overcome with anger, then he suggests, like, try contemplation and introspection. So here's the thing, like, as you might have seen, that his whole focus is to persuade people to do the right action, and it comes into question when they're not doing the right action, when they're doing something that is wrong. So when somebody does a wrong action, why do they do that? So is it because they think that this is wrong? Because if they thought that their action was wrong, they would be so angry with themselves that they will, keep criticizing themselves all the time. But we don't do that. Normally when we are angry because we feel we are injured. I mean, this is Seneca saying, not me. So we feel we are injured, and so we are angry with the person who is causing us injury. But when we do something wrong, we don't necessarily become angry with us. So what Seneca is saying is that happens because our thoughts are not checked. They are not verified. They are not corrected. And we have the belief, or we have the thoughts that whatever we are trying to do is the right thing to do. And the reason why we do wrong actions is because we believe them to be the right actions. Otherwise, we wouldn't do them. And so his suggestion is that to cure oneself of doing something wrong is to check our thoughts with the help of contemplation and introspection. So contemplation is to think, like, what is it that I actually believe? So, for example, this is a book. Oh, by the way, this is the book of Seneca. Let's say if I, sort of put the book with a big bang and it disturbs the quiet of this room, then you might think that's a wrong action. But I might think it's a right action because I want to make a point. I want to say that whatever I'm saying is the right thing. And therefore, I believe it's the right thing to do. And the thought behind this is that I'm trying to emphasize that whatever I'm saying is the right thing to do. So now you can see that my thought is wrong. And that's what Seneca would say too, that my thought needs to be corrected. And the thought is wrong because my subconscious is telling me that this is the right thought. So to understand what's in your subconscious, there was no other method than just thinking about it, introspecting. And sometimes when you have a difficulty of understanding what are the right thoughts and the wrong thoughts, then Seneca suggests that you go meet a wise person who can guide you. So like, for example, this is an example from the Gita, but in the Gita, when Arjuna is confused whether he should kill his relatives who are also posing as his enemies, he goes to Krishna. He doesn't take the decision by himself because it's a big decision and he's afraid of doing something wrong.
I see a little difference there in the sense, I feel Seneca makes you take full responsibility for your actions or inactions, as you may put, through your contemplation. That's of essence, as I see it.
Yeah, so you're right about that Seneca wants anybody who's trying to be wise to be completely rational. And so there are two ways, and you can see that they're contradictory. Seneca is or can be an imperfect philosopher. He's if you read him, he reads almost like a writer, like a novelist or something. He writes absolutely beautifully. But the downside is that sometimes his sentences can begin in one direction and end in another direction, even contradicting himself. And it's just the beauty of his writing. But anyway, going back to your question, sorry, could you just remind me the question again?
Contemplation, as suggested by Seneca as a prescription, is essentially to take full responsibility yourself, rather than put that responsibility on outside forces.
Right. So he gives you various tools that he wants you to know the scientific facts. He wants you to know what the morality is, what the virtue is. And if you have all those tools handy, then he believes that you can be rational. But on the other hand, he also says that, virtue is sort of connected with your soul. And so if you make one virtuous action, then all your actions in future would be virtuous because it's connected with the choice that your soul is making. So he can be contradictory in that sense, but at the same time, he's saying that, like how a painter needs to paint many canvases before he can be a better painter, a wise man needs to, continuously practice doing the right thing so that he can be wise at the end of his life.
I have two questions. One is, how do you define pragya in the compound Sthitaprajna, and what is its equivalent in Seneca's philosophy? And in Tripitakas and Buddhist texts, the concept again occurs in the term of panya. So is there any qualitative difference between pragya here in Gita and there in the Buddhist text? And how does Seneca has anything to say about the concept of pragya? Second thing is a bit personal about Seneca. What led Nero to ask him to commit suicide?
Okay, so let me start with the easy question. So Nero implicated Seneca in the conspiracy of Piso. I don't remember all the details of what the conspiracy was about, but it was not that Seneca was guilty. It was that Nero wanted him to die. So he ordered him to commit suicide, and implicating him in the conspiracy was just an excuse. Seneca was not the only one. There were many noblemen that Nero put to death. But since Seneca was such a highly powerful person, and he was also a tutor at one time to Nero, instead of directly murdering him, he said, okay, you go and commit suicide choosing your own method of death. And it's a very tragic story. He dies in the prison along with his wife. He has a very beloved wife, and she chooses to die with him. And if you read the story, I don't want to go into the gory details, but it was a very tragic death. And the good part about Seneca is that he actually followed the Stoic principles, and he accepted his lot, and he was very stoic about it, to put it, in the Stoic language. He also gave away most of his wealth. He had no children, and he gave away pretty much all his wealth, and so he followed a lot of his Stoic principles. But throughout his writing, you do see like the stages, like his early books were more contradictory, his later books were less contradictory, and that kind of stuff. Going back to your first question, which is pretty, it's sort of trying me right now, challenging for me. But prajna I would translate as wisdom, and in the most of the terminology here I borrowed from the Greeks because the ideas come from Greek. So the wisdom in Greek would be Sophia, and I'm not familiar with the Tripitakas, so I can't really say anything about the Buddhist philosophy.
Yeah, almost a chaya of Gita's Sthitaprajna text there in some of the passages.
Yeah, I guess Dr. Bhandarkar can say much
I'll
more.
explain that. I mean,
Yeah.
Prajna in the Bhagavad Gita and Prajna in the Buddhist literature, Panya in Pali, Theravada, and Prajna in Sanskrit and Mahayana and other sects. We have a description of Sthitaprajna in the Gita, but I do not think there is an elaborate description of the path, how to cultivate that. On the contrary, in the Buddhism, we have three kinds of prajna, threefold prajna: Shrutamayi prajna, Chintamai prajna, and Bhavanamayi prajna. And there is a path, there are techniques how to cultivate those prajna. The ultimate is Bhavanamayi prajna.
Thank you. It's been my project to learn more about Buddhism.
Thank you for the presentation. I don't have a question, but just some complimentary comment to what you said, that maybe in earlier times when there were no psychiatric or psychological evaluations, people were using the philosophical wisdom to cure themselves of these emotional, mental issues. So I was thinking about something which I think in the Western tradition they practice, which is called philosophical counseling, which I'm not sure if it's really running, but I know for a fact that people follow that, and once those problems and concepts, misunderstandings about the concepts in the mind are through, then the person is helped in that manner. So one point regarding that. And another is that if we say that philosophical counseling can help us emotionally to overcome these problems, emotional problems, then it's like there is a presupposition also that these issues may be psychosomatic, which the recent medical science says it's not necessarily psychosomatic, but there is some physical problem which needs to be cured with the clinical medicine.
Yeah, you're totally right about that. When people have physical problems, like here, Seneca is assuming that he's addressing people who are capable of being wise. But as you say, if there's somebody who is, physically damaged or mentally demented, then it's not possible to tell the person to rise, to the ethical standards of Stoicism. And there is a total absence of that discussion in Seneca. There's an absence of the discussion, like, in most philosophies, so to say. I haven't really come across something, and it could be just my fault, it probably is, but I haven't come across something that says, like, here are the crazy people who are, like, sort of, like, not crazy in the sense, like, we think they're crazy, but they have trouble being sane, maintaining their sanity. So I think one of the things that probably ancient philosophers were thinking is that they just, they just did not want people to go to that level. So they kept up, this rhetoric about how people have to try and be wise, how they have to sort of, reach these standards. So they just didn't allow people to get to that stage. Like, for example, the problem of suicide is like far greater now than it was many years ago. And partly because there was just so much violence. People used to die in wars, in natural calamities, and, just fighting with each other. Now we don't fight with each other. I mean, we may be angry with somebody, but we don't go and, sort of cause some kind of violence. I mean, we know what the law does when you do that. And philosophical counseling, yes, that's true. So again, philosophical counseling is done to people who do not have emotional disorders, but who are trying to improve their lives, trying to sort of it's a tool to help somebody introspect. Thank you. Yeah.
You mentioned circularity of definition of what's right action. That right action is one which is taken by a wise person. Who is a wise person who takes a right action? Is that circularity resolved somewhere, or it stays like that? In which case there is really no answer to it.
I know, yeah. Well, that is my interpretation, because I thought it was just fun too, because I saw the circularity. But no, the Stoics don't see it that way. And Seneca doesn't see that there is a circularity. You can interpret it that way. But basically what they're saying is that right action is important, and right action is defined, sort of in so many ways. And one of the definitions of right action is that it can be non-conventional. And then if something is really non-conventional, then how do you know that this is the right action? I mean, you can know that because a wise man is able to defend his or her action to you and explain to you why in this particular circumstance this may sound non-conventional, but this is the right thing to do. And you have to take their word for it because you know that they are wise people. But let's look at it from a layman's perspective. If he or she wants to copy a wise person's action, then, is that always going to work? Maybe not. And so you can say that, there is a circularity of argumentation here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. I mean, I don't know the answer.
Well, if you look at the Stoics, they wouldn't say that there is circularity. So they basically want you to do your own thinking. And this is another great gift that Stoics have given us, that, they don't say copy the wise person. They say, you try to be the wise person. You think about this because you know your situation far better than anybody else. And if you want help and advice, then go to the wise person. I mean, just to give an example, Mahatma Gandhi would be regarded as a wise person. And he fought the Battle of Independence so much differently than, let's say, somebody else like Lal Bal Pal. And yet, sort of people said or thought that he was doing the right thing. I mean, it was before the time that he actually, got the independence for India. But there were so many followers who believed that he was doing the right thing. So it's that kind of unconventional action. Thanks.
Ma'am, can you put some light on this? Why, after becoming wise, like Nareshwar, Sant Nareshwar or Swami Vivekananda, they became wise and they decided to end their life, to take samadhi or to attain moksha. Why so after becoming at this early age, they took decision to end their life? Though they are wise person and they could help others to become wise.
Okay, so actually the best person to answer that question is again Professor Bhavulkar. He was trying to explain to me that there's a difference between Sthitaprajnas and the Gyanis or Mumukshus, or how should we call them? And Sant Jnaneshwar is in a completely different category. And, one can't question what he should or could have decided.
What I want to try, they accept their end at an early age, like the Seneca also might accept his punishment to take suicide. Likewise, Krishna also died by the arrow, and he was not angry on that person who killed him. He accepted his death.
Right. Yeah, it's like way beyond me. I can't speak for any of these
Regarding
saints.
Vivekananda, I'll answer. It's not was a samadhi. He was suffering heavily from diabetes, and in those days insulin was not there, so it was a natural death. He was suffering from many diseases.
I see.
But they know their end. So
They could not be saved. They could.
They will be going to be departed.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is that, these are not considered suicide. Suicides are mostly, things that come out of frustration of some kind, or mental chaos, depression, mental disorders.
But we supposed to be, they are wise, so why they will frustrated or...
Right, so that's what I'm saying, that I can't speak for them.
They think they came to do something in this world. They finished the job. No more nothing to do. Go back.
Right, yeah, so from a scholarly point of view, I would like to stay away from that topic. Yes.
मी
Thank you.
मराठीतनं बोलतो थोडं. एक गोष्ट ऍड करू इच्छितो, शेअर करू इच्छितो की डॉक्टर अल्बर्ट एलिस म्हणून एक अमेरिकन सायकॅट्रिस्ट आणि सायकोथेरपिस्ट आहेत. 1950 सालापासून त्यांनी रॅशनल इमोटिव्ह बिहेवियर थेरपी म्हणून, पण त्याला आता रॅशनल इमोटिव्ह अँड कॉग्नेटिव्ह बिहेवियर थेरपी असं नाव दिलेलं आहे. आणि त्या थेरपी त्यांनी इव्हॉल्व केली. त्या थेरपी इव्हॉल्व करण्यामध्ये सिनेकाच्या तत्वज्ञानाचा त्यांनी खूप उपयोग करून घेतला आहे. ते खूप त्याला म्हणून मगाशी जो सायकोथेरपीमध्ये कसं कन्वर्ट करतात की अप्लाइड फिलॉसॉफी अशी ती डॉक्टर अल्बर्ट एलिस त्यांनी केलेली आहे. आणि योगायोगाची गोष्ट अशी की त्यांनी ती घेतली आहे सिनेकाच्या सर्व तत्वज्ञानावरनं. आणि आपल्या इथले जे पायोनियर आहेत त्याचे भारतातले, त्याच्यामध्ये डॉक्टर आनंद नाडकर्णी म्हणून मुंबईचे एक आहेत, इन्स्टिट्यूट फॉर सायकोलॉजिकल हेल्थचे. तर ते आता पुन्हा उलटा अभ्यास करतायत की त्या रॅशनल इमोटिव्ह बिहेवियर थेरपीमध्ये गीतेच्या तत्वज्ञानाचा कसा प्रभाव आहे. तर ते विषाद योग नावाचं त्याचं पुस्तक आहे त्यांनी लिहिलेलं. तर त्याच्यामध्ये सिनेकाच्या याच्यावरनं डॉक्टर अल्बर्ट एलिसनी घेतलेली सगळी तत्व आणि त्याच्याशी भगवद्गीतेतल्या श्लोकांची साम्यस्थळं हे त्यांनी पुन्हा उलट रिसर्च केलं. हे मला एक शेअर करावंसं वाटलं, कारण हे स्टॉईक तत्वज्ञान आणि हे जे आहे ते खूप वापरामध्ये आणि खूप छान त्याची सायकोथेरपी म्हणून वापर होतोय सध्या आणि खूप युजफुल आहे ते.
थँक्यू. तुम्ही नाव काय म्हणालात? आनंद नाडकर्णी आणि कोण?
डॉक्टर अल्बर्ट एलिस. REBT रॅशनल इमोटिव्ह बिहेवियर थेरपीचे त्यांनी जनक. त्यांनी 1950 पासून त्यांनी इव्हॉल्व केली. आता 2008 मध्ये ते एक्सपायर झाले. पण न्यूयॉर्कमध्ये अल्बर्ट एलिस इन्स्टिट्यूट म्हणून खूप मोठी हे आहे आणि ती रॅशनल इमोटिव्ह बिहेवियर थेरपी म्हणून फेमस आहे.
थँक्यू.
So I would just like to take a note here.
Yeah, I think that would be our last question. We are running out of time. Thank you.
I'll make a closure note. Okay. So first of all, it was a wonderful lecture. Proud to see you delivering this lecture.
Thank you.
Just to answer his question, why Swami Vivekananda or Jnaneshwar took early samadhi. Well, these are just few examples, Jnaneshwar and others which you mentioned. There are several other examples who did not took the samadhi. One of the prominent example which I remember is Professor R.D. Ranade, Gurudev Ranade. Once he attained his the stage of a wise person. After that 37 years he was alive and giving teachings to masses. That is what happens. Take a case of Buddha, take a case of many other cases where their people have lived. So all this is controlled for them. It is controlled by God, and depending upon the verdict they receive, they act accordingly. That is what one of the saint has mentioned, and I think this is one of the reasons why Jnaneshwar took early samadhi when he got his verdict from God that his karya is over, and then he finished his life. That could be answering your question. So sorry for taking a minute, but it was a wonderful lecture to listen to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mokashi, for this enchanting lecture, and we had a great discussion. I request Professor Bahulkar to present this book, one of our publications, to Dr. Mokashi as a token of our gratitude.
This is a translation.
Genesis of Gita
Genesis
by
of Gita
Professor
by
Yardi, Emar Yardi, Dr. Emar Yardi. Thank you.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mokashi. We are also thankful to the donors for instituting this lecture series in memory of the late Professor P V Bapat. Thanks are due to media for its timely publicity, and I extend my gratitude to this august gathering. Thank you all, and I declare that this function is over. Thanks a lot.